Evening, everyone. It's Monday night around 7 o'clock, and this is your closing comment. Okay, so the big news centered around COVID, the ship in the Suez, the exposure to Archegos, the quote, family office and fraud, and the bank's exposure to it. So let's get into it here. The Dow closed at a new all-time high again. What's interesting about that is the fact that there were twice as many stocks down on the NYSE as there were up. So that's a pretty major divergence. Not so with the NASDAQ, which was down 79, had been down more, just like the Dow had been up more. But over on the NASDAQ, where we closed down 79, advanced declines were 3-1 to the downside. The S&P was pretty much unchanged at down $3.45. And the transports were down 78, which is still less than 0.5%, which is in line with most of the others. However, what was not in line with the others was the Russell, down 62.80, or almost 3%. This decline in the Russell 2000, which is obviously the broadest of the indexes and is filled up with a lot of medium and small cap names, has really gotten hammered. I mean, it's down almost 15% off its high, where the Dow is making new highs. So there's a very ugly divergence there. The ship in the Suez being freed will help, but there are 370 odd ships sitting outside the entrance of the Suez to get through. And, that will take a while to get worked through. They can only go so fast, and the canal is only so wide, as we've obviously learned in the last couple of days. And so the effect is not as great here as it is in Europe, but in Europe it's just horrendous. Okay, beyond that, we had the bank's exposure to this family office. Fortunately for us, our banks are, number one, a little stronger, and number two, we're not so exposed to this debacle. But banks like Credit Suisse, which was down 11.5% today, closed 11.39 down $1.48, has big exposure. Nomura and Deutsche Bank also have exposure, although it's not terribly extreme, or at least it appears that way. What happened here, besides the extreme amount of leverage that was used, roughly somewhere between 5 and 7 times what was up, was the fact that this guy who runs this office has a history of insider trading and not the greatest history on performance. And what he was doing is he was using the same securities to gain more leverage by pledging them to other banks. So while Harvey Pitt, the old SEC guy, was on CNBC today, he clearly found faults with some of the exemptions that family offices have. Family offices is just a way to circumvent some of the filings of positions, and family, and they earned that exemption by virtue of the fact that they said that they were not handling outside money, and that they were generally in the capital preservation business, not the performance business. Clearly, no one told this guy. Goldman Sachs here closed 325.50, and that was only down $1.89 after pre-market and early trading being down 10. So that gained back 80% of its loss. JP Morgan closed 152.5, down 2.5. It was only down about 4.25. And Morgan Stanley closed 77.68, down 212. It too was only down about $4 at the worst. On the upside for the Dow, specifically helping the Dow, was Boeing, who got an order for 100 737 MAXs from their most loyal customer, Southwest Airlines. So we don't know what they paid yet. You can be sure they didn't pay retail, but I'm sure that we'll learn about that later. In Europe, especially in France, we are now reaching, as far as COVID goes, a fourth wave with a heavy response in the UK variant. And according to tonight's news and headlines, France is already approaching critical ICU, which means they're already running out of space. And, it's still the spring. I'm going to guess that portion of the reopening trade as it relates to international travel is probably going to get pushed back the same way that the cruise lines have been pushed back. If you remember, a year ago, they were talking about doing cruises in the fall. Then it was Thanksgiving. Then it was Christmas. They're still not doing cruises. They're still pushing them out. And the CDC has placed as much of a hold on them as it can. So of all of the groups today that I follow, banks were down, pot was down, energy was down, retail was down, airline and cruise lines were down, work from home was down. And on the upside, we had only the FAANG stocks and the group that is almost always up on a down day, which is consumer staples and the food supply chain. So it was not a good day. This is a very weak market at its core, regardless of what the Dow does on a day-by-day basis. Okay, so the chart on the screen is oil, and I'm going to blow this up a little, because the oil was actually pretty weak earlier in the day, although it had a higher high and a higher low. My concern was breaking through this high at 62.04, and tonight we're 62.09. So it looks like we're trying to get to move higher. I would say 63 and a quarter is going to be a very tough area. And I will also remind you that this trend line that starts a little further back, I'll show you, that starts back here on the first move higher, that we bounced off of several times, is now above the price. And that makes this area look to me like a bear flag. And if we don't solidly move above that 63.20, my guess is we're coming down here to $52. We're certainly coming down to, $55, $56. And that would just be a test of the low. The lows here are 57.29 and 57.25. If we were to close below that, it would really be a problem. On the other hand, Bitcoin was higher, substantially higher, and I'll show you what that looks like. We actually traded, I believe, as high as 59,000 today, and the all-time high is not that much further from there. All-time high here is 61,355, today's high. was, as I said, 59,000 even. So we bounced off this area of support at 50,000 on Thursday, I believe, of last week. And, we're getting towards the area where we can have a new closing high pretty soon. This closing high was, this was a high of 60, just under 60,300. This is the closing high on a daily basis, and that would be 58,975. So we're about 700 points below that right now in tonight's trade, but tomorrow's another day. It's a long night, and tomorrow's another day. All right, everyone. Be careful out there. This is a tough market, and it is sending some very strange signals. Have a good evening. I'll be back in the morning.